Welcome, dear friends, to Discipleship Biblical Narratives, where we take a deep dive into the study of the Bible. Today we unravel the chilling legacies of three of the most infamous women in biblical history, the queens, whose names have become synonymous with evil Jezebel, Athaliah, and Herodias. Imagine queens so power-hungry, so consumed by darkness, that they left trails of blood and chaos in their wake. Jezebel, the manipulative mastermind behind Israel's moral downfall, whose name alone still sends shivers down spines. Athalia, the queen so obsessed with power that she slaughtered her own grandchildren to seize the throne. And Herodias, who didn't just conspire in political plots but used her influence to demand the execution of a man of God. What drives such ruthless ambition? How did these women's wickedness shape the fate of nations? And what can we learn from their tragic stories today? Stay tuned as we dive deep into the lives of these cursed queens, exploring the diabolical acts that secured their place in history and the lessons their legacies still teach us. If you're ready to uncover the dark truths of their reigns, hit play and journey with us through the pages of Scripture. Queen Jezebel. The name Jezebel has ancient and rich roots that take us back to the time described in the Old Testament. Jezebel was not an Israelite, she was a Phoenician queen from a land where multiple gods were worshipped. She played a critical role in the political and spiritual history of Israel. Her name, often associated with strength, determination, and of course controversy, reflects her relentless nature. Although remembered for her tenacity, Jezebel is also known for manipulating her husband, murdering prophets, and conspiring against those who opposed her rule or the worship of Baal, a foreign deity. The exact meaning of her name is debated among scholars. Many suggest that it may mean something like Baal exalts or Baal is husband, indicating a direct connection to the Phoenician god Baal, who was widely worshipped in the land she came from. However, in Hebrew, the name takes on a pejorative tone, being translated as trash or impure, reflecting the deep contempt that her name would evoke among the Israelites. 1 Kings 16:31 tells us, "And it came to pass, as though it had been a light thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, that he took to wife Jezebel the daughter of Ethbaal king of the Zidonians, and went and served Baal, and worshipped him." Her coming to Israel marked not only a political alliance but also the beginning of one of the darkest periods of idolatry in Israel's history. Jezebel's story begins with her departure from Sidon, a prominent Phoenician city, to marry King Ahab, ruler of the northern kingdom of Israel. This marriage, clearly motivated by political reasons, was intended to strengthen ties between Israel and Phoenicia, a wealthy and powerful land. Jezebel was the daughter of King Ethbaal, a ruler who, according to reports, was also a priest of Baal, further establishing Jezebel as a figure deeply rooted in the worship of foreign gods. Her arrival in the kingdom of Israel did not just bring a new queen, but also the aggressive introduction of a foreign religion that deeply shocked the Israelite people. Contrary to the strict traditions and laws that the Lord had given to his people, Jezebel promoted the worship of Baal, a deity associated with fertility and natural forces. Jezebel's influence over Ahab was immense, leading him not only to tolerate but actively promote the worship of Baal throughout the kingdom. 1 Kings 21:25-26 describes the impact of this union. "But there was none like unto Ahab, which did sell himself to work wickedness in the sight of the Lord, whom Jezebel his wife stirred up. And he did very abominably in following idols, according to all things as did the Amorites, whom the Lord cast out before the children of Israel." Gradually, Jezebel erected temples in honor of Baal and installed her own priests and prophets in the courts of Israel. She was not content to be a passive consort. Jezebel was a controlling figure, using her position to strengthen the worship of Baal at the expense of the worship of the God of Israel. 1 Kings 18:19 gives us a clear view of the extent of her influence. "Now therefore send and gather to me all Israel unto Mount Carmel, and the prophets of Baal 450, and the prophets of the groves 400, which eat at Jezebel's table." This verse reveals that Jezebel maintained a true court of prophets, supported by the royal treasury, dedicated exclusively to the worship of Baal. Her influence was so vast that many Israelites, fascinated by the pomp and power of Baal, ended up succumbing to the temptation of idolatry. Her devotion to Baal was not limited to her personal worship. Jezebel was a queen feared by those who still followed the God of Israel. She fiercely opposed the prophet Elijah, who boldly challenged her prophets in a showdown on Mount Carmel. where God demonstrated his power by consuming the sacrifice with fire, while Baal remained silent. Even in the face of this undeniable proof of God's supremacy, Jezebel remained relentless in her devotion to Baal and her persecution of God's prophets. The story of Jezebel in the Bible is a vivid example of how the abuse of power and rebellion against God can bring destruction to both the nation and individuals. Upon becoming queen consort of Israel, Jezebel not only used her position to promote the worship of Baal, but also took drastic measures to eradicate any trace of faith in the God of Israel. 1 Kings 18:4 reports, "For it was so, when Jezebel cut off the prophets of the Lord, that Obadiah took 100 prophets, and hid them by 50 in a cave, and fed them with bread and water." This episode reveals the ferocity of her campaign against God's prophets, and her goal to eliminate any opposition to her religious agenda. In addition to promoting the worship of Baal, Jezebel used state resources to support hundreds of prophets of this pagan deity. Her influence was so profound that, under her command, the religion of Baal flourished in Israel, dividing the nation between those who worshipped the god of their ancestors and those who followed the new deity introduced by the queen. This sparked a spiritual crisis in Israel, as the nation drifted further away from its covenant with God, as recounted in 1 Kings 18:19. "Now therefore send and gather to me all Israel unto Mount Carmel, and the prophets of Baal 450, and the prophets of the groves 400, which eat at Jezebel's table." This summons marked the beginning of one of the most dramatic episodes in the Bible, when the prophet Elijah challenged the false prophets of Baal to prove the superiority of their deity. The challenge proposed by Elijah was straightforward. Both he and the prophets of Baal would offer a sacrifice, and the God who responded with fire would be recognized as the true one. For hours, the prophets of Baal invoked their deity, shouted, danced, and even cut themselves, but there was no answer. 1 Kings 18:26-29 describes this moment of despair. "And they took the bullock which was given them, and they dressed it, and called on the name of Baal from morning even until noon, saying, O Baal, hear us. But there was no voice, nor any that answered. And they leapt upon the altar which was made." Elijah then prepared the altar of the Lord, rebuilding it with 12 stones, symbolizing the 12 tribes of Israel, and even ordered water to be poured over the sacrifice to make the challenge more impressive. When Elijah prayed, the fire of the Lord came down from heaven and consumed the burnt offering, the stones, the wood, and even the water around it. 1 Kings 18:38 records this miraculous event. Then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt sacrifice and the wood and the stones and the dust, and licked up the water that was in the trench. This monumental event proved God's superiority over Baal, but the impact was deeper than a simple act of power. Elijah, in a moment of divine vengeance, ordered that the prophets of Baal be slain by the sword, thus eliminating the most visible followers of Jezebel's pagan religion. 1 Kings 18:40 declares, "And Elijah said unto them, Take the prophets of Baal, let not one of them escape. And they took them, and Elijah brought them down to the brook Kishon, and slew them there." This massacre, though seen as an act of justice in the eyes of many, aroused Jezebel's wrath. Upon hearing of the death of her prophets, Jezebel vowed to kill Elijah, as described in 1 Kings 19:2. Then Jezebel sent a messenger unto Elijah, saying, So let the gods do to me, and more also, if I make not thy life as the life of one of them by tomorrow about this time. Fearing for his life, Elijah cried out to God, asking for death, feeling overwhelmed and unable to continue his prophetic mission. 1 Kings 19:4 describes his despair, but he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, and came and sat down under a juniper tree, and he requested for himself that he might die, and said, It is enough. Now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am not better than my fathers. However, God, in his infinite mercy, did not abandon him. He sent an angel to strengthen Elijah, providing food and guidance so that he could continue his journey. This phase of the story reflects not only the physical and spiritual battle between Elijah and Jezebel, but also the prophet's deep internal struggle, which required spiritual renewal. As Jezebel continued to rule with an iron hand, her controlling nature manifested in other episodes. The most notorious was the conspiracy to take Naboth's vineyard, a simple man who owned a property near Ahab's palace. When Naboth refused to sell the vineyard, respecting the Israelite tradition of not alienating lands inherited from his ancestors, Ahab became disheartened. Jezebel, however, used her cunning to forge accusations against Naboth, as described in 1 Kings 21:8-10, so she wrote letters in Ahab's name, and sealed them with his seal, and sent the letters unto the elders and to the nobles that were in his city, dwelling with Naboth. And she wrote in the letters, saying, Proclaim a fast, and set Naboth on high among the people, and set 2 men, sons of Belial, before him, to bear witness against him, saying, Thou didst blaspheme God and the king, and then carry him out, and stone him. That he may die. And Naboth was unjustly condemned and executed, and Ahab took possession of the vineyard. This vile act of Jezebel did not go unnoticed by the eyes of God. The prophet Elijah was sent once again to confront Ahab and Jezebel, prophesying their destruction because of their acts of injustice and idolatry. Elijah, driven by the divine calling, vigorously denounced the wicked actions of King Ahab and his wife Jezebel, emphasizing that their corrupt practices and idolatry would not go unpunished. The prophet not only announced the imminent judgment upon the royal couple, but also specifically and in detail prophesied the tragic end awaiting them. For Ahab, Elijah declared that his throne would be torn from his hands and that his lineage would be destroyed, a terrible end for a king who had led the people of Israel into idolatry and injustice. Regarding Jezebel, the prophecy was even darker, and of Jezebel also spoke the Lord, saying, The dog shall eat Jezebel by the wall of Jezreel. 1 Kings 21:23. This horrific image was a symbol of divine judgment upon her cruel actions and her refusal to repent. Ahab, although impacted by Elijah's words, could not escape the fate that was reserved for him. 1 Kings 22:34-35 describes Ahab's death, which happened exactly as foretold, and a certain man drew a bow at a venture, and smote the king of Israel between the joints of the harness. Wherefore he said unto the driver of his chariot, Turn thine hand, and carry me out of the host, for I am wounded. And the battle increased that day, and the king was stayed up in his chariot against the Syrians, and died at even an arrow shot randomly in the heat of battle found Ahab. Thus fulfilling Elijah's prophecy that he would not escape unharmed, and that his death would mark the beginning of judgment upon his house. Jezebel's prophecy, however, took a bit longer to come to fruition, but the queen's fate could not be avoided. After Ahab's death, his son Ahaziah took the throne, but Jezebel's power over the kingdom remained strong. She, however, did not repent of her actions and persisted in her rebellion. When Jehu, one of Israel's generals, was anointed as the divine instrument to eliminate Ahab's lineage, Jezebel met her end. As Jehu entered Jezreel, where Jezebel resided, she tried to confront him from her window, perhaps in a final gesture of defiance or irony. But her servants, following Jehu's orders, threw her from the window. 2 Kings 9:33 grimly narrates the fulfillment of the prophecy, and he said, Throw her down. So they threw her down, and some of her blood was sprinkled on the wall and on the horses, and he trod her underfoot. Elijah's prophecy came true in a precise and terrible manner, for after her fall, the dogs devoured Jezebel's body, leaving only her hands, feet, and skull, just as had been foretold. Jezebel's end was not only retribution for the crimes committed against the prophets of God and her support of Baal worship, but it also symbolized what happens when power is abused and God's justice is ignored. The wicked actions of both Ahab and Jezebel brought judgment not only upon themselves but also upon their entire lineage, a clear example of the consequences of turning away from God's commandments. Proverbs 11:21 aptly reflects this reality. Though hand join in hand, the wicked shall not be unpunished, but the seed of the righteous shall be delivered. Queen Athaliah's story is one of the darkest and most tragic in the Bible, marked by unbridled ambition, idolatry, and an insatiable thirst for power. The daughter of Jezebel and King Ahab of Israel, Athaliah inherited the moral and spiritual corruption of her parents, who are remembered as 2 of the most cruel characters in Scripture: Jezebel, known for her idolatry and persecution of the Lord's prophets, and Ahab for his tyranny and murders. Deeply influenced Athaliah's trajectory. Like her parents, Athalia would become a prominent figure in the biblical narrative, but for the most sinister reasons. Athaliah's entrance into the royal house of Judah occurred through her marriage to Jehoram, son of the pious King Jehoshaphat of Judah. This union, which initially sought to strengthen alliances between the kingdoms of Judah and Israel, brought with it the idolatrous and corrupt practices of Ahab's house into the heart of the kingdom of Judah. The Bible mentions how Jehoram strayed from his father's ways and was led into idolatry by his wife. 2 Chronicles 21:6 declares, "And he walked in the way of the kings of Israel, like as did the house of Ahab, for he had the daughter of Ahab to wife, and he wrought that which was evil in the eyes of the Lord." Under Athaliah's influence, Jehoram turned away from God's precepts, and his reign was marked by idolatry, corruption, and injustice, plunging Judah into a period of spiritual decay. This spiritual deviation was a precursor to the tragic fate that awaited Jehoram. 2 Chronicles 21:18-19 recounts Jehoram's end, and after all this, the Lord smote him in his bowels with an incurable disease. And it came to pass that in the process of time, after the end of 2 years, his bowels fell out by reason of his sickness. So he died of sore diseases. Jehoram's reign, which had begun with the promise of a strong alliance, ended in tragedy and divine judgment, reflecting the price of idolatry and rebellion against God. Ahaziah, son of Athaliah, and Jehoram ascended the throne after his father's death, but like his parents, he followed the path of idolatry. His mother Athaliah's influence was crucial in ensuring that he perpetuated the moral and spiritual deviations that had characterized his family's reign. 2 Chronicles 22:3-4 highlights this influence. He also walked in the ways of the house of Ahab, for his mother was his counselor to do wickedly. Wherefore he did evil in the sight of the Lord like the house of Ahab, for they were his counselors after the death of his father, to his destruction. Thus, Ahaziah continued the legacy of idolatry and disobedience to God, which resulted in a short and tumultuous reign. With the death of her husband Jehoram and later her son Ahaziah, Athaliah took a bold and cruel action. She seized the throne of Judah, becoming the only woman to reign over the kingdom. Her rise to power was accompanied by an unthinkable act that revealed her true nature. In her unbridled quest for power, Athalia ordered the murder of all the members of the royal lineage of Judah, including her own grandchildren, in an attempt to eliminate any threat to her rule. 2 Chronicles 22:10 describes this terrible event, but when Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah, saw that her son was dead, she arose and destroyed all the seed royal of the house of Judah. This atrocious act, narrated in 2 Kings 11, exposes the depth of Athaliah's cruelty and desperation in her quest to consolidate power. Determined to eliminate any threat to her reign, Athalia did not hesitate to order the death of the royal descendants of Judah, including her own grandchildren. Her brutal action aimed to eradicate any possible contender to the throne, and thus she committed one of the most heinous acts mentioned in the Bible, sacrificing her own family to maintain control. However, this tragedy also put at risk a fundamental promise of God, the covenant made with King David that his lineage would rule Judah forever. 2 Samuel 7:16 reveals this promise, "And thine house and thy kingdom shall be established forever, before thee thy throne shall be established forever." In addition to the massacre of her own family, Athalia is remembered for her dark alliance with the priests of Baal, a deity that represented everything God abhorred. Following in the footsteps of her mother Jezebel, Athalia introduced idolatrous practices into Judah and was a strong advocate of Baal worship, which resulted in a dramatic rupture with the Jewish faith and the laws established by God. 2 Chronicles 24:7 describes the devastation caused by her for the sons of Athalia. That wicked woman had broken up the house of God, and also all the dedicated things of the house of the Lord did they bestow upon Baal. Her alliance with Baal was not just a matter of religious preference. It was a political and spiritual statement, leading the people of Judah away from their spiritual roots and into a state of idolatry that provoked God's wrath. However, amid the darkness surrounding Athaliah's reign, a story of hope and divine preservation emerged, the story of young Joash, her grandson. Joash represented the survival of the Davidic lineage, and with it, the continuity of the divine promise made to David. When Athalia began her murderous campaign to exterminate the heirs to the throne of Judah, Jehosheba, sister of King Ahaziah and aunt of Joash, took a courageous and faith-filled action. 2 Kings 11:2 recounts her heroic deed, but Jehosheba, the daughter of King Joram, sister of Ahaziah, took Joash the son of Ahaziah and stole him from among the king's sons which were slain, and they hid him, even him and his nurse, in the bedchamber from Athaliah, so that he was not slain. Jehosheba hid the 1-year-old baby in the Lord's temple, protecting him from Athaliah's relentless wrath. For 6 years, Joash remained hidden in the temple, protected by Jehoshaphat and the faithful priests who accompanied him. This period was crucial not only for Joash's survival, but also for the preservation of David's lineage and the fulfillment of God's promises. The courage of Jehoshaphat and the loyalty of the priests ensured that even under Athaliah's tyrannical reign, God's plan for Judah would not be thwarted. Unaware of Joash's survival, Athalia continued to reign, oblivious that the rightful heir to David's throne was being carefully nurtured in the very temple she had neglected. The climax of the revolt against Athalia reaches its most dramatic point when the priest Jehoiada presents young Joash, then only 7 years old, to the people of Judah, proclaiming him king. This moment, detailed in 2 Kings chapter 11, represents not only the restoration of the Davidic lineage, but also the triumph of justice and faithfulness to God over tyranny and idolatry. 2 Kings 11:12 recounts, "And he brought forth the king's son, and put the crown upon him, and gave him the testimony. And they made him king and anointed him. And they clapped their hands and said, God save the king." This moment of Joash's anointing and crowning was a milestone in Judah's history, symbolizing the renewal of the covenant with God and the hope for a more just and godly future. Jehoiada and the conspirators acted with great wisdom and caution. They ensured Joash's safety by placing guards around him and rallying the people to support him as their king. They seized the opportunity during a time when Athalia was away from the palace, allowing them to execute their plan without hindrance. Jehoiada led the people to the temple, where they made a covenant before the Lord and anointed Joash as king, signaling a significant turning point in Judah's history. Athaliah's response to this upheaval was swift and furious. Upon hearing the uproar of the people celebrating Joash's coronation, she rushed to the temple, only to find that the people had rejected her rule and embraced the rightful king. 2 Kings 11:13-14 recounts the chilling moment when Athalia confronted the scene, declaring, "And when Athalia heard the noise of the guard and of the people, she came to the people into the temple of the Lord. And when she looked, behold, the king stood by a pillar, as the manner was. And the princes and the trumpeters by the king and all the people of the land rejoiced, and blew with trumpets, and Athaliah rent her clothes, and cried, Treason! Treason!" Athaliah's reaction was not only one of anger, but also desperation as she realized that her reign was coming to an end. Jehoiada acted decisively, commanding the guards to seize her and remove her from the temple grounds, which marked the end of her tyrannical rule. Her death represented not only the defeat of a wicked queen, but also the restoration of true worship in the temple of the Lord. The people rejoiced as they finally saw the promise of God fulfilled with Joash on the throne, ensuring that the Davidic line continued. In the end, Athaliah's story serves as a stark reminder of the consequences of rebellion against God, the corrupting influence of power, and the faithfulness of God to his promises. Her downfall illustrates that no amount of ambition or cruelty can thwart God's plans for his people. Joash's rise to the throne signifies the triumph of God's purpose, demonstrating that even in the darkest times, his light shines through the faithful and the righteous. But now, faced with the reality of her downfall, Athalia was powerless before the course of events. Jehoiada the priest, without wasting time, ordered that Athalia be removed from the temple and executed. Her execution, far from the sanctuary, was a powerful symbol of the restoration of order and the rejection of the idolatrous practices she had brought to Judah. 2 Kings 11:15 describes Jehoiada's action, but Jehoiada the priest commanded the captains of the hundreds, the officers of the host, and said unto them, Have her forth without the rangers, and him that followeth her kill with the sword. For the priest had said, Let her not be slain in the house of the Lord. The fact that her execution took place outside the temple symbolized the purification of the holy place and the complete rejection of the corruption that Athalia had represented. With Athaliah's death, the nation of Judah was finally freed from a period of idolatry and oppression. Her downfall marked a significant turning point, paving the way for the reign of Joash, who, under the guidance of Jehoiada, sought to restore the practices and beliefs established by his righteous predecessors, such as David and Solomon. 2 Chronicles 23:16 highlights Judah's renewed commitment to God. And Jehoiada made a covenant between him, all the people, and the king, that they should be the Lord's people. This event not only represented the end of a tyrannical regime, but also the beginning of a process of spiritual healing and restoration for the kingdom of Judah. Joash's ascent to the throne brought with it the promise of a renewed covenant with God and a return to true worship, far from the corrupt influence of Baal worship that Athalia had promoted. Jehoiada's leadership as a faithful priest of God was instrumental in ensuring that the young King Joash was raised in the ways of the Lord and that the kingdom of Judah would once again walk the path of justice and faithfulness. Athaliah's story, marked by acts of betrayal, murder, and idolatry, serves as a powerful reminder of the consequences of straying from God's commandments. Her downfall, like that of her mother Jezebel, reveals that divine justice is inevitable, and that those who rule with oppression and rebellion against God ultimately reap the consequences of their actions. The reign of Joash, on the other hand, was a sign that even in the darkest moments, God's faithfulness to his covenant remains steadfast, and he always brings renewal and hope to those who trust in him. Queen Herodias was a central figure in the complex and tumultuous Herodian dynasty, a family marked by intrigue, unbridled ambition, murder, and immorality that deeply stained its history. The Herodian dynasty, rulers of Judea under Roman dominion, is remembered mainly for its political intrigue and betrayals, which often led to power struggles, frequently culminating in acts of violence and assassination. Herodias, as a direct descendant of this lineage, was shaped by a family environment deeply marked by a thirst for power and a lack of scruples, traits that would accompany her throughout her life. Herodias was the granddaughter of Herod the Great, one of the most powerful and, at the same time, most feared rulers in the history of Judea. Herod the Great, known for his great architectural works such as the reconstruction of the temple in Jerusalem, was also infamous for his ruthless cruelty and paranoia. He did not hesitate to eliminate anyone he perceived as a threat to his throne, including members of his own family. In an act that reveals his brutal nature, Herod ordered the murder of his favorite wife, Mariam, and even his own sons, fearing conspiracies against his rule. This environment of betrayal and death was the backdrop of Herodias' childhood and youth, shaping her ambitious personality and her willingness to do whatever was necessary to achieve her goals. Through her marriage to Herod Philip, her half-uncle, Herodias began her own rise to power. Although this marriage placed her in a comfortable position within the dynasty, Herodias was not satisfied. Her desire for more influence and status would lead her to break ties with Philip and become involved with Herod Antipas, also her half-uncle, who ruled Galilee and Perea as tetrarch. This scandalous relationship, considered illegal and immoral under Jewish law, marked a turning point in her life, not only for its religious implications but also for the political consequences that would follow. John the Baptist, as a prophet who preached repentance and righteousness, could not overlook this incestuous marriage that went against the law of Moses. Publicly, John declared that this union was unlawful in the eyes of God, which provoked Herodias' fury. Matthew 14:3-4 recounts the beginning of the conflict, for Herod had laid hold on John and bound him, and put him in prison for Herodias' sake, his brother Philip's wife. For John had said unto him, It is not lawful for thee to have her. John's words not only criticized Herodias' morality, but also challenged Herod Antipas's authority, causing political discomfort. Deeply offended and humiliated by the public exposure of her sin, Herodias began to harbor a deadly hatred for John the Baptist. To her, both her position and her marriage were being directly threatened, and her response was to plot relentless revenge against the prophet. Although John the Baptist had directly struck at the heart of Herodias' morality, he had also shaken Herod Antipas's ego. Pressured by Herodias, Herod eventually imprisoned John, believing that his imprisonment might calm the conflict and silence the public criticism. However, Herod hesitated to go further. Despite imprisoning John, Herod feared taking more extreme measures against him. Mark 6:20 explains this reluctance, for Herod feared John, knowing that he was a just man and holy, and observed him, and when he heard him, he did many things, and heard him gladly. Herod recognized that John was a man of God, respected by the people, and in some ways even admired him. This admiration caused Herod to hesitate in executing the prophet, despite Herodias' insistence. On the other hand, Herodias did not share the same regard. Her desire for revenge against John the Baptist was unrelenting. The prophet's words had deeply wounded her reputation and exposed her actions before the people of Israel. For Herodias, John's imprisonment was not enough. She wanted him dead. However, John's popularity among the people and Herod's caution in dealing with such a respected man meant that she had to wait for the right moment to carry out her plan. Herodias' pressure on Herod was constant. She knew that as long as John was alive, her position of power alongside Herod would be threatened. The conflict between Herodias' desire for revenge and Herod's reluctance to kill John created growing tension within the court. Torn between the fear of losing public respect and the fear of Herodias' wrath, Herod kept John the Baptist in prison but alive. However, Herodias was determined, and soon she would find the perfect opportunity to fulfill her desire for revenge. The story of the fall of John the Baptist reaches its climax during the lavish birthday celebration of Herod Antipas, an event that would become one of the most infamous moments in biblical history. The feast was held in Herod's palace, where officials, nobles, and military leaders from Galilee and Perea gathered. It was an extravagant celebration, marked by opulence, where the local elite indulged in feasting and an abundance of wine. The atmosphere was charged with lust and hedonism, and Herod, already intoxicated by power and wine, could hardly foresee what was about to happen. In the midst of the revelry, the dramatic entrance of Salome, Herodias' daughter, occurs. Although her name is not directly mentioned in the Gospels, tradition identifies her as Salome. Young and beautiful, she was called to entertain the guests with a seductive dance, carefully orchestrated by her mother, Herodias, who saw in this occasion a golden opportunity to carry out her revenge against John the Baptist. Mark 6:22 describes, "And when the daughter of Herodias came in and danced and pleased Herod and them that sat with him, the king said unto the damsel, Ask of me whatsoever thou wilt, and I will give it thee." Salome's dance was so captivating that everyone was amazed, especially Herod, who, enthralled by the spectacle and the festive atmosphere, made an impulsive promise that would change John the Baptist's fate. Swayed by Salome's beauty and the celebratory mood, Herod, without thinking of the consequences, declared publicly, "Ask of me whatsoever thou wilt, and I will give it thee." To further emphasize his commitment, he added in grand fashion, "Ask even unto the half of my kingdom." Mark 6:23. Herod's promise, though extravagant, was a reflection of his vanity and his desire to impress his guests. He had placed himself in a position where he would have to fulfill whatever request Salome made in order to keep his word before all present. Herod's reckless promise opened the door for Herodias' meticulous plan. This was the opportunity she had been waiting for patiently. Knowing that Herod was now bound by his word, Herodias quickly influenced her daughter to make the most terrible and calculated request possible. Instead of asking for wealth or power, as might have been expected, Herodias instructed Salome to demand something far darker, the head of John the Baptist. Mark 6:24 recounts the moment when Salome, without hesitation, followed her mother's advice and said, "I will that thou give me by and by in a charger the head of John the Baptist." When Salome, following Herodias' instructions, asked for John the Baptist's head on a platter, Herod Antipas found himself in a deep dilemma. Salome's request shook the king, who was aware of John's holiness and righteousness. Matthew 14:9 describes Herod's state of mind upon hearing the request. "And the king was sorry. Nevertheless, for the oath's sake and them which sat with him at meat, he commanded it to be given her." Herod knew that John did not deserve such a fate, but he was trapped by his own imprudence. He had made a public promise in front of his guests, the most important nobles and officials of his court, and for a ruler like Herod, appearing weak or unable to keep his word would be disastrous for his reputation. The pressure of honor and social appearance outweighed his own moral conscience, leading him to make the fateful decision. Despite his sorrow, Herod ordered the execution of John the Baptist. The decapitation of John was not merely an act of violence, it was a calculated move by Herodias to rid herself of the prophet, who had publicly condemned her actions and threatened her position. The execution was carried out, and John's head was brought to Salome on a platter, as requested. In the aftermath of this brutal act, we see Herodias achieving her goal, but at an immense moral and spiritual cost. The murder of John the Baptist marked a turning point in her life, sealing her legacy as one of the most villainous figures in the New Testament. Her actions led to the tragic loss of a righteous man, whose voice had condemned the immorality of her life. Furthermore, Herod's decision to execute John reflected the danger of compromising one's integrity and the power of external pressures to lead one into sin. Both Herod and Herodias serve as cautionary tales of how ambition, lust for power, and moral decay can lead to actions that have devastating consequences. Ultimately, the stories of Joash and Herodias serve as contrasting narratives. While Joash represents the opportunity for renewal and restoration in obedience to God, Herodias embodies the destructive consequences of rebellion, ambition, and a life devoid of integrity. Joash was able to follow the right path under the guidance of Jehoiada, leading to a renewed commitment to God, while Herodias' actions led to chaos, bloodshed, and eternal condemnation. In the end, these stories remind us of the choices we make and the legacies we leave behind. We can choose paths that honor God and reflect His righteousness, or be tempted to follow paths that lead to destruction, reflecting the darkness of our own hearts. Let us seek to be faithful to God, to choose righteousness, and to live lives that honor Him.